Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program from Washington. On today's show, the African American community and racism in the U.S. Our guest, Roland Roebuck, an African American activist from Washington. Roland Roebuck, warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for the opportunity of being here with you.
Roland, what is the situation of the African American community in prison?
Well, let me say that the numbers of Afro-American prisoners throughout the United States is abysmal. 60 to 70% of the prison population is composed of Afro-American citizens.
And it's only 15% of the general population.
That is correct. So we have an overwhelming presence of individuals in prison, and my hope is that these individuals could have been in a position of making a contribution to the development of these countries.
Is there a business behind all that?
There is a series of corporations that concentrate on the development of prison system, because for each individual that you have in prison is a significant amount of money that these corporations made. So it is in the interest of these corporations to build more prisons in order to generate more money. My preference is that they should be building more universities, educating more of this particular community, and not invest so much money in the prison system.
For example, and you correct me if I'm wrong, in the state of New York, to educate a kid takes $8,000 a year. To keep someone in prison takes $56,000, 7 times more. And if you educate the children, they're not going to end up in prison.
Right. So I see it as a calculated effort between many times the Department of Justice, private corporations, to engage in this sinister relationship to continue nourishing the prison system, which also destabilizes communities. But we must also analyze where these individuals come from. They come from economically deprived areas, and many times they are forced to engage into criminal activity in order to survive.
And do the prisoners, African American prisoners, while they are in prison, do they work?
Many are forced to work, and the degree of pay, the range is between $1.25, $1.50. So,
an hour.
An hour. So many corporations use this prison labor force in order to produce goods. So we have Motorola, we have HP, we have Victoria's Secret, we have Lockheed, we have McDonnell Douglas. Many of these major corporations exploit the presence of prisoners in order to generate their own products, which they are going to sell at a higher price.
So are they interested to keep that sort of situation?
In other words, as long as the crime level continues to flourish, these corporations are making a lot of money. And I'm talking about in the range of billions of dollars.
Do you believe that this is something that is deliberate?
It is deliberate, because if we look at how the Department of Justice functions, it is sort of a factory to produce prisoners to then place them in these concentration camps for labor to generate products that many times they don't even benefit.
The U.S. justice is the same for a white person than for an African American person?
No. And statistically, we can see that the Department of Justice and the court system has two standards. And the standards are centered on who is being judged. There is the mentality that a white person that is before the judicial system has the potential to be rehabilitated. That is not the case with blacks and Latinos. So whites receive a docile approach with respect to their criminality. If we look at white crime, we can see that the extent of punishment differs between that type of crime and crime in the street.
Is that racism? Is that discrimination? How would you judge it?
I would say that it encompasses racism, discrimination, a disdain for the communities of color, and it is indeed very hypocritical that the United States is the center of this hypocritical approach to justice.
What is your reading about what happened in Ferguson?
Well, in Ferguson, we have to analyze it at different levels. We know that for many years, the police department, which is, I would say, very segregated, because when you have a population that is minority and the police presence, the white police presence is almost 90 to 95%, there is a discrepancy. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that the black community in Ferguson has been suffering from civic apathy, meaning that they have not approached the political system in order to advance their interests. So as a result of this murder by this white cop, the community now feels that they have to register to vote, they're going to become more active, they're going to postulate candidates, etc. But that should have taken place years back, not now.
And do you think that that white cop that is going to be tried for the murder or the death of Michael Brown is going to have a fair judgment?
Let's look at the pattern nationwide. Cops, white cops, shoot black people like it's a sport. So we are hoping that the jury in Ferguson will render a righteous decision. That is, that this young man was shot in a very cruel manner because he did not represent a threat to the police that shot him. But the pattern, once again, is to allow white cops to go scot-free.
Is the situation the same today that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago? What is the pattern between racism and discrimination?
It is the same. It's just that the cosmetics have changed. Racism is the foundation of this country. Racism is going to continue 100 years from now. It's just that the approach and the technology has shifted a little bit. The reason why they are requiring cops to have a camera either on the side or on their vest is to ensure some degree of fairness. But many police departments, especially those in the South, did not want to have those cameras because that is the place where you have the highest level of police brutality exerted upon communities of color.
So racism, it's not exactly equal in all throughout the US, or they're more or less in different areas?
I'll give you an example. Washington, D.C.
Where we are.
We have here a strong Afro-American presence, but you also have a strong Afro-American community. So the relationship between police and community, I would say, is somewhat favorable. But when you find yourself in a community that is predominantly black with white police presence, the social interaction and the dynamics change drastically because many of these white cops are super racist and they say it.
And that happens in the South more than in other parts of the country?
I would say it happens more in the South. And if we look at the legacy of enslavement, we know that those southern states were the states where you had the highest concentration of enslaved populations.
Barack Obama, first African-American president. What is your reading about him?
Well, my reading about him was that I was very elated to see someone that looks like me being in the White House. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that his presence has not diminished the extent of racism that exists throughout the United States. A lot of people assume that by having Barack Obama there, having his black wife, his black daughters, his black dog, that things were going to change. No, his presence there intensified the level of racism that is manifested not only in various communities, but behind me in Congress. You had more white congressional leaders attacking the President of the United States based on his race. Congressional leaders.
So it means that the racism reached even that level?
It reaches Capitol Hill, it reaches Congress, it reaches all sectors of society in the United States.
And do you believe that President Barack Obama defends or push or takes more care about the African American agenda than other presidents?
No. And let me explain why. His excuse is the following: I am the president of all Americans. In his confused mind, he feels that if he begins to advocate for the interests of black people, that the white folk are going to defect from the Democratic Party. You have to understand the dynamics of presidential leadership, okay? It is always with the intent of advancing the interests of the party. The party dictates what are you going to say, who you're going to appoint, what legislation you're going to introduce, etc. So it's all about politics. It's not about bettering the conditions of Afro-American, Latinos, and other minorities throughout the United States.
And how has been the reaction of the African American community towards Barack Obama?
It goes by age. 50 up, they adore him. 50 to 30, they begin to question his commitment to advancing the interests of Afro-American community. The younger folk, they still sort of wobbly with respect to criticizing him. But the intellectual black sector has defected from his support to Obama. We have we have Cornel West, we have many other leaders that are not invited to the White House based on their strong attacks towards Obama.
So in a way, do you believe that he has deceived the African American community?
He has deceived the Afro-American community with respect to his soft postures in advancing the interests of the Afro-American community, but also the Latino community. Because he is the one that could have put pressure on Congress to advance immigration reform, and he made a withdrawal from that support based on a calculated decision not to affect the upcoming election. But he promised that after the elections, he was going to introduce immigration reform.
Well, before being elected in 2008, he promised that in the first year of his presidency, he was going to pass the immigration reform. And at that point, he had the majority in the two chambers, and he didn't.
Right. Now, the issue is the following. The Democratic leadership does not respect the Latino leadership nor its issues. Okay? If we were a powerful political entity, all these vacillations with respect to advance and immigration reform would not have taken place. But we have many of our leaders who have been co-opted, and as a result, diluted the intensity of activists that are trying to advance immigration reform.
You are an activist, a community activist here in the area of Washington, in the Latino community too. What is the relationship between the African American Latino community and the African American community?
Well, I'll say that the relationship between the Afro-American community and Latino community here in Washington, D.C. is positive. I cannot say the same in other states, especially those southern states where you have whites attempting to diminish and sabotage immigration reform based on their dislike towards Latinos and other minorities. So the relationship here in Washington, D.C. is, I would say, positive. The government has introduced legislation to advance the interests of Latinos. We have the Office of the Mayor on Latino Affairs. We have the Commission on Latino Community Development. We have legislation that assists Latinos. For example, here you can also secure a driver's license. So we have a legacy of civil rights advocacy in this city.
What are the similarities between the Latino community and the African American community?
That both communities are oppressed and they don't know it, nor do they realize the political potential that they have to control these institutions if they engage in serious political coalitions. And without that, we are going to continue to be fragmented and not have a serious impact upon the legislative agenda on Capitol Hill.
Is it too strong to say that the minorities of African Americans and Latinos are, in a way, a version of modern slavery?
That is strong language. But if you look at the Latinos that migrate into the United States, and you look at the areas in which many of them, based on the immigration status, have to work, I would say yes, especially in the farming communities in which these individuals are exploited, many times not paid, because there's always the threat of, if you complain, I'm going to call the immigration so you can get deported. So these individuals are very vulnerable because they do not have the legal shield to protect their interests.
There are analysts that see sort of a revolving door in the situation of poverty among the African Americans and also among the Latino communities. For example, given the fact of the permanent dropouts at school, they observe, because they don't study, they are poor, and because they are poor, they don't study, and they do not get out of that revolving door, that vicious circle. Is that the situation of today's, in many cases, of those communities?
I would say partially so, but I bring another element. You also have the element of many Latino parents forcing their kids, especially when they are in high school, to drop out from school to go to work. Because the priority is not so much to educate yourself, but to generate income in order to survive, not only here, but to send money to their respective countries. that is, I'm not saying that that is the situation in all Latino families, but that is another element. You also have the element of early pregnancy. You have many of our Latina youngsters walking around with the little cart and the little cute baby, and the husband is not around.
Yeah,
Teenage pregnancy is a serious problem within our community, and that reinforces the issue of poverty stagnation, because you're going to get stuck, not only yourself, but the child.
How do you see the future?
The future, I try to be very optimistic. I'm hoping that we will be able to establish serious and sustainable coalitions between the Afro-American leadership and the Latino community. I am hoping that many of our minority students will appreciate the acquiring of education in the area of science, engineering, computers, math, etc., because that's where the future is going to lie. With respect to the rest of us, I'm just hoping that we'll be able to achieve some level of economic, social, and cultural sustainability.
Do you believe that that is possible when in reality to participate in the political process is not in the genes of many of the people of our communities?
Why? Because we come from an experience in which the politicians in our respective countries, be it the Caribbean, Central, and South America, have violated our trust. We look at many politicians in those areas as individuals that have the tendency to steal money, advance the interests of their families, and not become true to the role that they're supposed to play, which is to advance their respective communities. So that attitude prevails when you come to the United States. So we have to take time to educate the younger generations and say the political process is the instrument that you use to advance your interests.
And on the other hand, given the fact that many of the parents of the kids that you were mentioning in a way of members of the minorities were not exposed to education, how do they know how important is education in the life of their kids?
Well, the Department of Education needs to refocus its curriculum into civic studies. Because many of these parents, as you say, based on the fact that they are busy working 3 jobs, many times don't have the time to engage in that type of discussion. You also have to understand that based on the immigration status, these individuals cannot vote. So that creates some level of apathy. But the political decisions that are made, especially in this city, affect those individuals. So those who are born here and have the right to vote need to be educated and encouraged to participate in the political process. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have elections, and in those elections, we are going to determine if the Democratic Party is going to control the Senate or lose the Senate. If we lose the Senate, minorities in this country are going to be in a serious predicament, because these individuals are not interested in advancing the interests of minority communities.
Is the U.S. going to be as racist and discriminatory as you describe it today in 20 years, in 50 years? What is going to happen?
I don't think so. I think that the younger generations, based on all these interactions, are going to create a new paradigm of social interaction. And I'm hoping that the issue of racism, discrimination, and exclusion will be diminished. So I am hopeful.
Roland Roebuck, thanks very much for joining us.
And thank you for the opportunity of sharing a few thoughts.